Welcome. We are here once again in Exopolitics TV with an update from independent scientist Leuren Moret from Berkeley, California. Welcome.
Oh, hello, Alfred. Nice to do another interview with you.
As I understand it, today we'll be covering updates on Fukushima, environmental radiation levels in the U.S. and in Japan currently, and increases in the death rates. I would just like to mention, for the benefit of our viewers, that we've been spending a great deal of time prior to this interview, which was recorded on October 2nd, 2011, and there appears to be outside interference with Ms. Moret's video internet system. So if the sound or the focus go bad during this interview, it's not due to technical difficulties that we at Exopolitics have. It's directly due to interference by unknown parties, probably from military intelligence or affiliated law enforcement agencies in the U.S. who do not want this information to come out. Now, having said that, Leuren, let's get back to what the environmental radiation levels are from the Fukushima false flag operation of March 13th, 2011, and what the increases in the death rates are since that event.
Well, it's horrendous, and it's not being reported, and people should know about this. So I've collected a lot of very, very crucial information for the public, and I hope this helps to empower them to find out more and also to protect themselves. And thank you very much for doing this interview and all the interviews that we've done on this horrific weapon system. I think that Professor Frank Dalton pretty much summed it up in a recent article he was quoted in. He's a professor of applied linguistics at Ryukoku University in Kyoto, Japan. This is in the southern part of Japan. And he says, quote, "In a really tragic sense, Japan has lost its future. I can't believe this is going on. This is a nightmare that you think you could just wake up from. Everything changed for me that afternoon when the house started shaking, and I don't know about the future anymore." And Alfred, this is a young man married to a Japanese woman with four small children, and he is evacuating his wife and children probably to Australia. And he said, but I will probably have to stay here because I won't be able to get a job anywhere else. So essentially, it's a death sentence for him. And he's willing to do that to save his wife and children. So I'd like to talk about the excess deaths in the U.S. updated for March 13th to September 3rd. And I'm going to start with a report on beta radiation in the United States following the Fukushima disaster. And a report on beta levels in the U.S. Has established the background levels from 2010, that's 1 year ago, before the Fukushima disaster. And that would have been the average radiation levels in 129 cities in the U.S. And this is all EPA data. And so they look at the levels from 2010 for the same time period in order to assess and to monitor the increases in environmental accumulated Fukushima radiation throughout the United States, and they picked 129 cities. So this is since March 11th, 2011. For each time period, the beta level increased in all 129 cities many times the 2010 level for the same period. So if we look at March 15th through 31st, when all those explosions were happening in the reactors, buildings, during that period, March 15th to 31st, the levels of beta radiation they were measuring were 5.09 times higher than last year. So that is a huge increase. For April 1st to 30th, the background levels, the levels measured in 129 U.S. cities were 2.01 times higher than background 1 year ago for the same period. And for May 1st to 23rd, the background level, the increase was 1.15 times background 1 year ago in 2010. So that's really bad. And every city, 129 cities, all of them showed increases. That means that there isn't any place in the U.S. that wasn't contaminated. The March multiplier effects, those are called the multiplier effect. How many times higher than 1 year ago for the same time period. So the March multiplier effects were the highest reported through May, and also very high in some particular cities, with significant increases in all cities that were tested. So the highest ones were Tucson, Arizona, which was 18.2 times higher than the same time period last year in 2010. Eureka, California, it was the highest in the United States with a 53.05 times increase. That's a huge amount. San Diego was 11.42 times higher than 1 year ago. Honolulu, Hawaii was 23.98 times higher, and Salt Lake City, Utah was 16.77 times higher. The top beta increases in 15 cities were Phoenix, Salt Lake City, Tucson, San Diego, Honolulu, Riverside, California, Orlando, Florida, Hilo, Hawaii, Las Vegas, Nevada, San Francisco, California, Angeles, California, Omaha, Nebraska, Sacramento, California, Jacksonville, Florida, and Idaho Falls, Idaho. And for March 15th to 31st, we had a huge amount of rainfall. We have an average of 12 to 14 inches a year in California. And for March 15th to 31st, there was 8 inches of rainfall in Eureka. And that might explain why they had 53 times higher radiation levels than a year ago. In Los Angeles, it was 3.8 times higher. 3.8 inches in Los Angeles of rain, 4.1 inches in Sacramento, 4.72 inches in San Francisco. So we had, in 2 weeks, basically in San Francisco, we had the amount of rain that we would get in 4 to 6 months here. So 4.02 inches in Orlando, Florida, and 6.53 inches in Hilo. So Hilo got a lot of rain too. 3.38 inches in Portland, and 3.58 inches in Olympia, Washington. So that's pretty amazing, because Olympia, Washington, in that region, they get over 150 inches a year. That's why they have a temperate rainforest there. And yet in San Francisco, we got more than they did, and we shouldn't have had that much rain at all at that time of year. There were also differences in the amount of dry deposition. So this is air masses moving through without rainfall or snow, and still depositing high levels of radiation. So the highest dry deposition happened in Arizona, Utah, California, Hawaii, and Florida. In some states, compared to wet deposition, and that was in California, very high rainfall, Hawaii, Florida, Washington, and Oregon. So the radiation levels on the ground depend on two factors: the environmental contamination. It depends on weather and on geography. So apparently these levels seem to depend on the rainfall, although not completely. So according to CNN, radioactive beef has leaked into the consumer market over in Japan. This is from the CNN blog. I can only see this spreading to other countries through the oceans. If you remember, just recently, the U.S. government said that it is going to stop monitoring the fish for radiation. So much for the seafood lovers. And the whole food supply is contaminated and being contaminated. And it's contaminated with a cumulative effect, because the radiation continues being released from Japan. It's being continually accumulated in the global environment, and more severely in North America and the Northern Hemisphere. So now we're going to go to the excess death rates to see what the effects of this increase in all cities in the United States of radiation that has been reported from EPA data. Now, this data from the Centers for Disease Control does not include infant mortality. That is reported separately. However, as it was reported in late June by Dr. Jeanette Sherman, I've worked with her for 11 years, infant mortality rates in West Coast cities from Washington State to California have increased 35% between March 11th and June 18th. And here in Berkeley, where I live, that represents the death of about 18 babies in California, in Berkeley, between March 11th and June 18th. The infant mortality increased even more to 45% in Vancouver, Seattle, Portland, and Spokane. The increase in excess deaths in the general population would be expected to be lower than for infant mortality, because infants are much more susceptible to radiation exposure, especially at low levels. I mean, even at very low levels. So the U.S. regions, and these are groups of states, which is called a region by the Centers for Disease Control, showed significant increases in mortality since March 13th, 2011. And I'm going to give you the PDF to put in your article in the Examiner, and then people can actually go to the reports and read it themselves. There's also a CDC weekly update by state and by cities, and that gives the raw numbers of deaths, but this has to be massaged with statistics and so forth, because change in seasons, winter time, and just fluctuations locally in death rates, which may be due to environmental causes or whatever, have to be accounted for. So the weekly increase of excess deaths over what was reported for last year in 2010 have ranged from 2.7% in 1 week. That's a huge change in 1 week, to 9.1%. And this is reported on the maps I have for July 9th through September the 3rd. So in the Pacific region, which is Washington, Oregon, California, Alaska, and Hawaii, the weekly increases between between July 9th and September 3rd were, and this isn't for every week, but I wanted to just give people an idea of the variation, 3.6%, 3.4%, 3.6%, 3.6%, 3.6%, 3.3%, and 3.5%. Now that's quite a lot of that's pretty steady, and that's the Pacific region, and that represents 6,716 excess deaths. For the West South Central region, it's Oklahoma, Arkansas, Louisiana, and Texas. And the weekly increase, and it isn't a negative decrease anywhere in any city. It's positive in all of the cities that have been reporting. So the weekly increase for the West South Central area was 5.2%, 5.9%, 7.0%, 7.0%, 6.6%, 6.9%, 4.9%. That represents 8,730 excess deaths. Now, what's interesting is that Washington, Oregon, California, Alaska, and Hawaii, the Pacific region, is a much larger region. And Oklahoma, Arkansas, Louisiana, and Texas is a much smaller region, and yet they had very much higher death rate. I don't know why yet, but I hope that I'll be able to figure it out. So the total excess death rates between March 13th and September 3rd for the U.S., that's a period of 25 weeks, or about 6 months, is 8,730, I'm sorry, it's 34,129 deaths. So that's going to be, if you include the infant mortality and you include the increases in the next months leading January 1st, there'll be over 100,000 people who have died since March 11th from the Fukushima radiation right here in the United States. Now another, did you have a comment? I can't hear you.
Could you repeat that last statistic about the 100,000 persons?
Yes. We have, as of September 3rd in the United States, between March 11th, when the Fukushima disaster occurred, and September 3rd, which is where this report ends, we've had 34,129 excess deaths in the United States in 25 weeks. And by January 1st, which is about October, November, 4 more months, 3 or 4 more months, I would estimate that number of total excess death rates in the United States, including infant mortality and including increases which are going to happen because of the winter time, which causes a lot of deaths. I'm sure that in the year 2011, since March 11th, that we will have over 100,000 Americans who die because of the Fukushima radiation contamination of our environment and the atmosphere.
Now, would you estimate, from your knowledge as a radiation expert and as from an epidemiology point of view, will in 2012 will the total number of excess deaths from Fukushima increase in the U.S.? That is, will it be more than 100,000 or less than 100,000? That is,
could you
which
say that?
way? Yeah,
Could you be?
yeah. Which way is the curve going? Is this the peak of excess deaths due to Fukushima in 2011, or are excess deaths increasing in 2012 over 2011?
Well, we wouldn't be able to really say for sure because what's happening at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant is cloaked in mystery and hidden in a cover-up, international cover-up to protect the nuclear industry. But I know one thing for sure. This is a continual, permanent point source of continual releases every single day from Japan into the ocean and into the atmosphere. And it's a very unstable situation. It's unpredictable. It's never happened before. It's the largest and most serious nuclear accident in the history of the world. And the melted fuel has melted down into the ground from all three reactors, and we have no idea what will happen. It could have a huge explosion underground like happened at Chernobyl. That was very, very serious. But I'm quite certain this disaster is not over, and not in our lifetime either. There's no way to remedy what's happened because TEPCO failed to take the proper response to the disaster, and there should have been an international effort with militaries and radiation experts to help Japan do it, but no one was allowed to.
Now, but here is my point, that 100,000 are those who died immediately in 2011. And the radiation was generally dispersed throughout the U.S. population, especially by the HAARP-triggered tornadoes and the HAARP-triggered rains, so that people you've dosed about 300 million people. Now, those people may be increasingly getting sick of the 300 million over the coming years, so that perhaps only 100,000 died in 2011, but from those, discounting even new radiation from the Fukushima event, those who were dosed in 2011 could in fact die in 2012 and subsequent years from cancer and other ailments. And that's the epidemiological number that I'm trying to dig at. It seems to me that excess deaths were still on the upward curve.
Oh, definitely. And because the radiation levels are going to continue to increase in the environment, and a way to make a comparison is to compare the atmospheric levels in Japan, at the peak of the readings, the highest concentrations in Japan, and Dr. Chris Busby estimated this from air filters that were taken from cars and trucks, vehicles in the Fukushima area, and also Tokyo and Chiba. And Chiba is between Tokyo and Fukushima, further to the north. And what he estimated, and this is a very conservative estimate from the radiation levels he found in the air filters, is that the radiation levels in Japan at the peak of the Fukushima contamination was 1,000 times higher than the radiation levels measured at the Harwell British Government Radiation Lab in England at the peak of bomb testing. And so if we look at the effects of bomb testing in the United States, you can multiply it by 1,000 times.
Wow.
So some of the things that happened from bomb testing was infant mortality increased, conjoined twinning or Siamese twins that have not fully separated. They've grown together. They share organs and different things. I have seen a large increase in conjoined twinning all over the world, especially in the areas where the depleted uranium is being rained out from the bombing in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Yugoslavia. Right. And so we're seeing conjoined twinning increases in animals and humans. The SAT scores, these are the scholastic aptitude tests that high school seniors take for entry into colleges and universities in the U.S. The entire score average for the whole United States, this is all of the brightest children in the U.S., college bound, declined 12% for children born during nuclear bomb tests. And the peak of bomb testing was in 1963. And the exact kiloton of nuclear bomb tests each year correlated with the percentage of decline in the SAT scores. So the dose you give causes the effects that are more or less predictable. They're more severe, the more exposure. And what we're facing in the United States and in North America is just the destruction of the population. It's going to affect the population for hundreds and thousands of years. It's irreversible.
Thank you. We're now about halfway through this segment, and I know that there's a lot of more information regarding radiation and maternal death rates, for example, and other topics. So perhaps we should move on from that chilling thought that you just shared with us to radiation and maternal death rates.
Yes, well, the highest maternal death rates, and they're on the rise globally, but the highest ones in the world are in Afghanistan now because of the depleted uranium bombing campaign. And they happen to be in one corner of Afghanistan, which borders Pakistan, where the highest bombing has occurred, and that has caused horrendous increases in maternal deaths, and usually the baby dies too. However, in Herzegovina and Bosnia, Macedonia, and Croatia, which just had the NATO war there in 1998, the maternal death rate is 10 or fewer per 100,000 women. Australia is lower than that, and this information is from the medicalobserver.com, which is in Australia. and they have 8.4 deaths per 100,000 women. Now, it's very surprising that in the United States we have higher mortality death rates in women, pregnant women, but in California in 2005, the mortality rate was actually 11 women per 100,000. Now, California, from 1996 to 2006, the maternal mortality rate in 10 years tripled from 5.6 to 16.9 per 100,000. And what are the causes? Morbid obesity. There are more and more morbidly obese women now delivering babies, and they are really a problem. Also, the medical profession is saying aging mothers, hypertension, diabetes, hemorrhaging from cesarean sections is also increasing, and that's particularly high in obese mothers. So you could say that all of these illnesses that I've just named actually are radiation-related illnesses. So as the radiation levels increase globally, and I have the depleted uranium levels that I graphed in Los Angeles drinking water, you can see every battle in Iraq and Afghanistan increase the levels in that particular year in Los Angeles drinking water. And I have a family who gave me their hair tests. They have sky-high levels of uranium in their hair. So it's really, it's a disaster all over the world, and hardly anybody even knows it. In Australia, obesity in pregnant women increased from 30 a year in 2008, from 1 to 2 in 2003. So in 5 years, obese pregnant women increased from 1 or 2 in a year in 2003 to 30 in a year in 2008, and that's increasing all the time. And the U.S. and Australia are testing depleted uranium and other exotic weapons all over Australia because the Australian government turned over their military bases to the United States in 2003. And that's just when the increase in obese pregnant women started. So the uranium is affecting already the Australian population. And in Australia and the U.S., cesarean sections are the highest in the world, with 30.9% of births occurring through cesarean sections. That was 2007. And in Australia, gestational diabetes increased 20% between 2001 and 2006. And the reason I'm bringing this up and reporting on this is because these are what we can expect now very severely to increase in Japan and in North America. So the very last thing I wanted to talk about with the effects of radiation on maternity is that there's a global decrease in the sex ratio of the number of boys born per 100 girls. And that is something that is very high in radiation-contaminated areas, and the UN and the WHO and the CIA are hiding this statistic more than any others. Yes, Alfred?
Yeah, is that boys per 1,000 girls or boys per 100
No,
girls?
it's boys per 100 girls.
Oh, okay, good. Now, I guess the main question that I have on this section is this. If we take, for example, the case of Australia, where immediately following the U.S. beginning to use depleted uranium weapons there for training purposes, allegedly, obesity in pregnant women increased almost 30-fold. We now have the highest, along with the U.S., C-section rate in the world, and gestational diabetes increased 20%. Is it your professional opinion that the U.S. military was doing that for a military training purposes or for purposes of depopulating the Australian population?
Oh, it's multi-purpose. They're depopulating in particular areas that they want to carry out future mammoth mining projects. And Australia is a treasure box of minerals, including very large amounts of uranium deposits in Australia. So basically, with this HARP program, the highest targeted areas for mining are Haiti, the Haiti region, Caribbean, Norway, northern Norway. That's probably for oil and gas and other minerals like iron. And all of northern Turkey, from the Mediterranean or Europe all the way to the border with Iran. That has a lot of gold deposits there. And then the Tian Shan Gold Belt, which is in Tajikistan and extends into China and Indonesia. And there are HARP facilities at every one of those locations, and there have been large increases in earthquakes, just like in Japan since 1965. And in Japan, they had a 7,070% increase in earthquakes, major earthquakes, 6 or above, magnitude 6 or higher, after 1965, as compared to the 70-year period before that.
Right. Now, we have about...
And so what they want to do, they want to depopulate these regions where they want to go in and mine. So yes,
right.
The use of depleted uranium, absolutely, the agenda for using depleted uranium is depopulation.
Thank you. We have about 20 minutes remaining in the segment, and I know that we have a lot of material to cover. I know that you wanted to talk about the Japan radiation contamination maps.
Yes, there's a very, very excellent map. It's a radiation contamination route map, which Professor Yukio Hayakawa made. He's from Genma University. And he made an excellent map that shows where the routes that the radiation took, and it has certainly contaminated the whole top third of Japan to such a level that the entire region should be evacuated, Alfred. And it's making its way now down into the Tokyo area, and very soon Tokyo will be uninhabitable. There are hotspots all over Tokyo that's as high as Chernobyl.
Well, Tokyo is in the macrocephalic kind of category, and that means cities that contain disproportionate amounts of the Japanese population. So where would all those people go?
Well, there's 30 million people, 35 million people in the larger Tokyo region, and even 400 years ago, in the Edo period, Tokyo was the largest city in the world. So it has a very, very dense and large population. And, I mean, the prime ministers and the government basically, they don't really want to evacuate them, because where would they put them? And what would it cost? So they would just rather say nothing and let people be exposed and deal with the consequences later. But it's an impossible situation. It's just completely impossible.
So
And the Ministry of Education released 2 maps on September 29th, which go along with Professor Hayakawa's map. And this is the radiation levels in northern Japan from aerial surveys. So these are planes flying overhead measuring the radiation. And again, the whole top third of Japan is contaminated. And the cesium deposition, cesium-134 and cesium-137 deposition on the ground is it's just horrendous. Cesium attaches to muscle, and so this is a main mechanism for heart damage. It kills the heart cells, the cells in the heart, and the heart only replaces 1% of the cells a year. So an awful lot of babies and toddlers and infants are just going to drop dead. A low level of cesium exposure internally in a baby or a small child very quickly kills 25% of the heart cells. The baby can't survive. So these are the kinds of acute things that are happening very rapidly over there, and people are already dying of leukemia and just dropping dead. Some young people went in their 30s to rescue people's pets who had been evacuated from the exclusion zone, and those 3 or 4 of them have been reported to be dead already. One young man, about 34, went in to retrieve people's cars who were evacuated and staying in shelters. So they're not even people who live there. They just went to a few times to rescue animals or to retrieve cars. That's how acute it is. And a young woman, Keiko Ichikawa, she's the author of a blog, A Letter from Fukushima. She's a maternal health care worker, and there's a clip of her about a minute and 41 seconds with English subtitles called Severely Malformed Babies Have Been Killed in Japan. And she is speaking at the Odawara conference on the Fukushima disaster just a month ago, August 21st, in Fukushima Prefecture. And she said that there are hardly any deformed children seen in Japan. And she said she talked to doctors and they told her it's because they kill them at birth. And when the mother wants to see the dead baby, the doctors will not allow the mothers to see the dead, deformed baby. They just tell the mother that the baby died during birth. So I'm sure that's happened in the United States and other countries as well.
But is this deformed children since Fukushima, or is this just part of a general practice in Japan?
It's a general practice because it's only been 6 months since the disaster, and the greatest damage occurs in the first month after conception, when a woman hardly even knows she's pregnant.
I see.
And in mouse studies, this is exposing pregnant mice to low levels of radiation. It causes the death of 80% of the embryos. And that has to be just as high in humans as well, because we have the same hormones and estrogen and biological systems. That's why they do animal studies to decide whether drugs or whatever are okay for people to take. And so if the embryo makes it through that first 8 weeks, 4 to 8 weeks, and it survives the first 3 months, there is continued damage to that embryo as it develops into a fetus. And those babies that survive that period are born, and they're just simply monsters. it's cruel to keep them alive, actually, because they have no chance at a decent life or life quality, and it's a terrible burden on the parents and on society.
Now, uh, what about radiation refugees?
Well, the and Dr. Chris Busby has done some very good video clips on the internet, which you can put in your article as well, on the effects of radiation. Now, what's happened is the radiation refugees are primarily referring to, at the beginning, to the people leaving Fukushima prefecture, either voluntarily or the government evacuating the people living in the 20-kilometer limit zone around Fukushima prefecture. I'm sorry, the Fukushima power plant. But now, more and more Japanese and foreigners are deciding to leave contaminated areas or to leave the country altogether. And I'd like to quote Professor Frank Dalton again from Ryukoku University in Kyoto. He said, quote, and this is just 2 days ago, "In my family, we don't eat fish anymore. My wife is Japanese. My children have grown up as Japanese. For Japanese to stop eating fish is a huge adjustment. Just as 9/11 changed everything, especially in the United States, 3/11 that happened 10 years later, 3/11 has changed everything in Japan. And I'm just afraid this has dealt a near fatal blow to Japan. Japan will never be the same." And I'm afraid that he is correct. It's a tragedy that I've been aware of since it happened, March 11th, and it's just horrifically painful to watch it roll out the way it is. But he also said, quote, "We in Otsu City, Shiga Prefecture, this is near Kyoto, 311 miles, which is 500 kilometers from Fukushima, are seeing readings around 0.15 microsieverts on average, which is around 5 times what the Japanese government is reporting. My wife and children will leave Japan as early as possible because I perceive a growing exodus will come and it might become hard to place kids in schools." So there, this poor man, in the great years of his life with his small children, has to be separated from them and stay in the contaminated area in order to support them. And the radiation is being spread everywhere in Japan, including Okinawa. Quote, "Already in Okinawa, for example, people are noting that food from the Fukushima area is in supermarkets. In the future, it will be virtually impossible to avoid contaminated food if one is living in Japan, but also outside of Japan, because Hillary Clinton, our Secretary of State in the United States, has signed an agreement with the Japanese government to import Japanese food, and it's all contaminated."
When did Hillary Clinton sign this agreement?
It was in April, I believe.
So that was immediately after the Fukushima event.
Yes.
So in your professional opinion, given the fact that Fukushima had just occurred and that high levels of the, as you've mentioned in previous programs, high-ranking officials in the Obama administration, including Obama himself and the David Chu, the Secretary of Energy, and his deputy, who is a former BP chief scientist, may have had a direct role in the Fukushima event. Do you believe that Secretary of State Clinton's signing of this agreement was on her part a knowing step in participating in the radiation genocide of North America.
Of course. And Stephen Chu was there with her.
Right. So we have about 7 minutes left in this segment, and your current statements seem to indict the chief officials of the Obama administration as knowingly participating, including now Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, Stephen Chu, knowingly participating in the covert radiation genocide of the United States population through the importation of Japanese food. Would you like to talk more about this and how this result has come about?
Well, I think that it's important to remember to follow the money trail. And before Obama ran for office, about 2 years before he ran for office, he received very large sums of money covertly from the Crown of England. This is the City of London bankers and the royal family. So that's how he got elected, basically. And not only that, but Stephen Chu received a Nobel Prize for his work in alternative energy when he was at Stanford. Stanford and University of California actually developed HAARP co-developed HAARP with the Soviets at the Livermore Nuclear Weapons Lab and facilities in Europe. So there's a dirty Nobel Prize from the Wallenberg banking family that's awarded to Stephen Chu. And then 2 years at the time that Obama decided to run for office, Stephen Chu was just moved to be director of the Lawrence Berkeley Lab. And I knew then, which is a Department of Energy facility, and I knew then that he was being moved on to some very important position. Otherwise, he wouldn't have left Stanford. And the Lawrence Berkeley Lab, where the Manhattan Project started, was certainly a strange place for him to go. It was sort of career suicide if he was going to stay in science. And as soon as Obama was elected president, he immediately appointed Stephen Chu as Secretary of Energy, and Stephen Chu immediately appointed Dr. Stephen Koonin, who was a BP scientist, British petroleum scientist, to be his Undersecretary for Science. And Stephen Koonin is a Jason scientist. It's the Jason scientists who developed HAARP. So it's starting to look like a cover-up of HAARP and a cover-up of BP involvement was their main agenda. And because what happened after that is that the BP disaster, oil disaster and chemical pollution of the whole Caribbean and the eastern United States occurred on that British Petroleum very deep well platform that was drilling when it all blew up. And there were also blue beam technology seen and there are photos of it coming from the sky, HAARP, down into the platform, and then the explosion occurred. So it sure does look like that was a HAARP disaster as well. And Stephen Chu and Stephen Koonin absolutely delayed response. They allowed BP to violate our EPA laws and use a very, very toxic chemical, which didn't really help anyway, but it polluted the whole Caribbean and East Coast. It was in the hailstorms and those tornadoes that we had, in the southern part of the U.S. in April, and that would have mixed the chemicals with the radiation from Fukushima and increased and escalated the health impact to that region. So to me, the final nail in the coffin is that the Tromsø, Norway heart facility, which is owned by UK, Norway, Sweden, Finland, Japan, France, and Germany, is where the heating of to destabilize the fault zone occurred for 10 days before the Fukushima earthquake. And the Gakona, Alaska magnetometer, which is our heart facility in Alaska, transmitted the earthquake frequency 2.5 hertz for 3 days before the earthquake occurred. So it looks like there's a pretty strong trail of evidence, forensic evidence, to say that yes, they did it on purpose.
Now, Barack Obama is running for president of the United States for re-election in the 2012 election, and he stated his intentions. I have a two-part question. The first part is, during the Fukushima event, Barack Obama, I think, he was traveling in the southern hemisphere, correct?
Yes, Barack Obama just happened to be, President Barack Obama just happened to be in the southern hemisphere with his wife and 2 children when the Fukushima disaster occurred, and he didn't bother to tell any Americans about it or to return to the greatest emergency in the history of this continent. And he stayed out of the radiation down there.
Right. Now, do you believe that, in your professional opinion, having done all of this research, that Barack Obama personally, as President of the United States, was cognizant that there was a radiation depopulation event going on, and that he personally made the decision for that reason to evacuate himself and his family from the country?
Well, before Obama became President of the United States, he and his wife lived in Chicago, and they're actually social fascists. His wife, what's her first name?
Michelle?
Mrs. Obama. Michelle Obama worked for the University of Chicago Hospital. That's a Rockefeller institution. And it's in the middle of a black ghetto in Chicago. Her job as vice president of community relations with that ghetto was to reject black patients from that ghetto and send them back to the very scarce resources, health resources in the ghetto. She would not admit them to the hospital because they couldn't make profits off them.
Now, given that so are you saying that it's probable that, or more probable than not, or beyond a reasonable doubt, that President Barack Obama had knowledge of the radiation disaster, of the radiation false flag operation, and a radiation genocide ongoing on the U.S. from Fukushima?
From the pattern of the earthquake large increases since 1965 in Japan. As a professional geoscientist, I investigated every one of the earthquakes, 32 earthquakes that occurred after 1965. And in the last 10 years, before the Fukushima earthquake, it's called the Great Tohoku earthquake, there was a pattern in the last 10 years that indicated to me they were manipulating the entire earthquake zone where the Pacific plate and the Eurasian plate meet under Japan, and in order to move the stresses into the Fukushima area to cause a large magnitude earthquake. And the fact that Obama happened to be in the southern hemisphere at that time isn't proof. But the fact that he did not respond to this disaster and he did not come back to the United States to be commander-in-chief of this disaster indicates to me that he was complicit and aware and deliberately left the American people on their own.
Thank you. We've actually gone a bit over on our time, so I'm just going to thank you very much and look forward to your next participation with us. We've been with independent scientist Leuren Moret from Berkeley, California. I'm Alfred Weber. Thank you.